This video is a review of section 9.4, factoring to solve quadratic functions. After watching this video, you should complete the assignment here to make sure you understand section 9.4. Alright, in this section we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations using factoring. Factoring is the third method that we've learned to solve quadratic equations. Before we do that, take a second to pause the video and see if you can write down and remember the first two. So the first method that we used was graphing. And as an example in graphing, we're looking to see where the parabola touches the x-axis. Those are the solutions, the roots are the zeros. And as we explored at the end of last week, you can use your calculator to quickly find solutions via graphing. The second method that we learned last week was using square roots to solve quadratic equations. The third method we're going to learn today is called factoring. And then we'll learn the final two methods, which are called completing the square. We'll talk about that tomorrow. And next week we'll talk about something called the quadratic equation. And that'll be our fifth method. It's important to start thinking about and remembering all five of the methods, especially the ones that we've already learned, so that you can pick the best method. And that's something we'll really focus on at the end of the unit. All right, solving quadratics by factoring, what we're going to learn today, is something you're very familiar with. The only thing that's new is we're going to talk about something called the zero product property. The zero product property says that for any numbers a and b, if a b equals 0, then that means either a equals 0 or b equals 0. So for example, if you have, for example, 3 times 0, that's going to be equal to 0. Or if you had 0 times 5, that's going to be equal to 0. It doesn't matter which number is 0. If any number that you're multiplying by is 0, the answer is going to be 0. You could even have, for example, 0 times x, and no matter what, that will be equal to 0. We'll explain why that's important in just a second. All right, so the great news about this method, solving by factoring, is if you can factor, you should already feel pretty confident about factoring, and from there, solving is pretty easy. So let's take a look at our first one. We'll need to set equal to 0 and then solve for the solution. So if you take a look, we already see this equation is set equal to 0. That's a very important part. Once we're set equal to 0, we can just think about factoring. Two numbers that multiply to negative 32 and add to positive 4. You should end up with g plus 8 and g minus 4. Now again, these are all equal to 0. What we did is we just factored this trinomial into its two factors. Thinking now about the product, the zero product property, if this part right here equals 0, then the whole equation will be equal to 0. Or if this part right here is equal to 0, then the whole equation will be equal to 0. So the last step of solving is we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So I'm going to write g plus 8 equals 0, and I'm going to write g minus 4 equals 0. Last step, we'll subtract 8 on both sides here to get g equals negative 8. And we'll add 4 here to get g equals 4. At the end, we'll write our answer as a solution. So g equals, we write the smaller number first, second number second. I'm writing it inside of brackets, not parentheses, to show that those are both answers for g. This isn't a coordinate pair with an x and a y. Those are both the solutions for g. All right, we can use that same process to continue factoring as we did last unit. So if we look at part B, you'll notice, well, for this one, the a term is greater than 0. So we're going to need two numbers that multiply to negative 76 and add to negative 21. multiply to negative 72. All right, I'll give you a second to think about that. You can pause the video. And the same thing when you get to part C, we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 160 and add to negative 27. All right, so those are the factors of 72 if you didn't have your calculator.